Top 10 Most Dramatic Courtroom Moments Ever. It's the reality of the world we live in that there will always be bad eggs amongst us. But the criminals on this rundown have taken things a notch higher during their courtroom hearings. This also proves our point that there are people out there you can never save. Stay till the end because in a minute, we'll tell you about 10 crazy moments that transpired in a courtroom. Let's get started. Number 1. Diana Lovejoy. Diana Lovejoy had hired her firearms instructor, Weldon McDavid Jr., to take the life of her husband. His name was Greg Mulvihill, and he was in the middle of a messy divorce with Diana. Greg ultimately survived the attack on his life, and both Diana and Weldon were charged with conspiracy to kill. At her hearing, Diana collapsed when a guilty verdict was pronounced, and the judge had to clear the courtroom so she could be resuscitated. Once the medics were satisfied that she would pull through, the sentences were handed out. Diana got 25 years to life for hiring someone to kill her husband, while her accomplice Weldon got 50 years. Diana's own aunt gave testimony against her. Diana had in fact approached her aunt to point her in the direction of anyone who could kill for hire. Apparently, Diana had family issues, and her breakdown in court didn't help solve her problems, nor did trying to kill her husband. Number 2. Michael Madison. During court proceedings, Michael Madison maintained a smile on his face. It was so bad that when the father of one of his victims was giving a speech, Michael just sat there smirking away. This devil-may-care attitude angered the victim's father so much so, he was prompted to attack Michael right there in the courtroom. It took the efforts of the bailiff and other officers to prevent Michael from receiving the assault of his life. This father was actually a big guy, and we bet he would have given Michael a good licking to humble him. Michael continued smiling for the rest of the day. He was being prosecuted by the state of Cleveland for strangling several women to death and wrapping their remains in garbage bags. He even kept a detailed diary of his murderous exploits. He was ultimately found guilty on all 14 counts of charges leveled against him, which included homicide, kidnapping, and assault. Number 3. Cody Howard and Tanner D. Jacobson. Cody Howard and his accomplice Tanner Jacobson, who were being tried at the Lewis County District Court, had simply made a run for it. Mind you, they still had their handcuffs on them. But irrespective of this, they fancied their chances of getting away. At least it was the most original idea we've seen of criminals trying to evade the law. The courthouse cameras show both men running into another courtroom in session and surprising everyone there. They eventually get to the stairwell, but Howard stumbles when he dares to scale a flight of stairs in quick time. He is eventually nabbed as he exits the emergency door. Jacobson makes it as far as a block away before being apprehended too. Afterwards, the judge would order the bailiffs to place an ankle chain on both perps for being so foolhardy. Number 4. Arthur Booth. Arthur Booth would receive the surprise of his life when he was arraigned in front of a judge who was a former classmate of his. You heard that right. Judge Mindy Glazier recognized Arthur as her former classmate and acknowledged that back then, he was a good guy. Arthur couldn't help but break down crying. Before now, Arthur's life had spiraled into gambling and narcotics. Mindy, however, remembered him as a bright and promising student. By the time life brought them together in this manner, Arthur had been in and out of prison several times, and his life was nothing to be proud of. So, for old time's sake, Mindy was lenient and gave Arthur a light sentence. A few months later, Arthur was out of jail for good behavior. He has since turned his life around. Number 5. Kimberly Kessler. Kimberly Kessler was charged with killing Jolene Cummings, who was her co-worker. She was subsequently sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her crime becomes more heinous when you consider that her victim was a mother of 3. We can't really say why she did it, but the problem more likely arose because of a workplace dispute. During the hearing, Kimberly was so disruptive and rude, like she didn't care anymore. It got to the point where she had to be taken to a side room with a TV to observe the rest of her trial. At some point, she went on a hunger strike amid concerns for her health and had to be moved around in a wheelchair. To top things off, she even cursed out the presiding judge. Number 6. Penelope Soto. Penelope Soto just so happened to be high in court. And by that, we mean she had taken a few questionable substances just before her court hearing. And that was a counterproductive move if you consider what she was being charged with. Her crime was being caught in possession of opioids without a prescription. So you see why it was a bad idea to appear in court under the influence of narcotics. In addition to that, she was only a teenager. The presiding judge was named George Rodriguez from Miami, Florida, and Penelope was fortunate he saw through her act, or else it would have been worse. She was constantly flippant and disrespectful and occasionally flashed the middle finger, and so the judge played along. Anytime she acted up in that way, he would double her bail conditions. It got to the point where he dared her to say the curse words again, and she did. Now she was in contempt of court, and the judge sentenced her to a month in jail. Her reaction was priceless. Number 7. Alan Miller McCarty. Alan actually threatened a judge with death after he was denied in a child custody suit. And it's exactly this kind of behavior that made the judge rule against him. Even after he was told by the courts to never contact his wife or kids, he flouted the ruling and went so far as to threaten them too. But his biggest mistake was to threaten the judge who oversaw the case, and not just once. He had called several times during which he used highly racist and inflammatory language towards the judge, so the police were able to trace the phone call. Upon being nabbed, Alan forcefully resisted arrest and had to be tasered twice. He ended up in the hospital for his troubles. He was subsequently kept in custody so he could cool off, but the charges against him remained and he had to be heard in court irrespective of the conditions. Number 8. Calvin Lloyd Griffith. Calvin was charged with the crime of grand theft auto, and we're certainly not referring to the popular computer game. Essentially, he stole a car and led the police on a wild car chase. Not to mention the potential number of lives that were put in harm's way as he was being pursued. When he was finally caught, he made his life more difficult by resisting arrest. He even tried to grab an officer's weapon. The case went to court, and he was slammed with a sentence of 60 years in jail. He would also serve a mandatory 24 years before the possibility of a parole hearing. But that was not all there was for Calvin. At some point during the court proceedings, Calvin actually twerked and constantly spoke out of turn. This prompted the judge to switch off his microphone. He was also removed from the courtroom because his antics were getting out of hand. Number 9. Kyandria Cook. Kyandria Cook got into big trouble with the law. She was 18 years old at the time and was tried as an adult. She was complicit in the murder of another 17-year-old. The underlying crime, however, was a carjacking that spiraled out of control and resulted in her victim getting shot. Kyandria had an accomplice named Kendrick, and together they lured their victim using a dating app. Once he got to their location, they took his car under the impression that Kyandria was driving around the corner to get some cash. Ultimately, Kendrick pulled the trigger on the unsuspecting boy. As such, the crime was premeditated, and Kyandria was the main instigator. Upon her sentencing, Kyandria's mother broke down in tears and howled her grief in the courtroom. The judge even had to halt the proceedings. Kyandria was eventually given a 20-year sentence. Number 10. Bryce Rhodes. Bryce Rhodes was charged with killing 2 brothers and their 12-year-old nephew. During the proceedings, he was constantly disrespectful. When the presiding judge confronted him about it, he rudely replied by saying he could do whatever he wanted. Smiling was not a crime, but under these circumstances, he wasn't supposed to be showing his teeth. You just don't do that. And whatever sympathy he could have gotten was simply tossed out the window. The presiding judge also shared this same sentiment. So that's it, folks. Have you been in a courtroom before and seen someone act out? Or better yet, have you been on jury duty before in a high-profile case? Let us know about it in the comments section. And remember to subscribe to our channel and click on the notification bell button to see more of our videos.